Shalom and welcome to Contextual Bible Study. My name is Denny Thompson and today we are on lesson number 32. We're going to look at the story of Legion. Legion, the one who was filled with demons. Now, just to review, because this is important again to this story today also, this whole idea of the ancient Hebrews, eventually called the Jews, idea of creation. And they would look upon the earth as the land and the waters sitting on top of Sheol or the abyss or hell itself. And they also the understanding would be there would be these openings going down into that area. Okay, so that would be, again, this concept. And even today, as we're going to cross the Sea of Galilee to go into a place called the Decapolis and meet Legion, this is important to understand this because all of these ideas are going through the disciples' minds. All right, now, and again, while we review, we've learned that the sea, that Jesus walking on the sea was his demonstration that he had power over the abyss, over the storms and the waves and that type of thing, that he had total power and control over that. Or in a bigger sense, he has power over evil and Satan. And this idea of Peter, who suddenly focused on the chaos, the waves, and the trouble, he started sinking. But when he held Jesus' hand, Jesus is the one who brings order to the chaos. Now, because I was a history and geography teacher, I want to kind of draw out something else here. This is not directly from the Bible. It's just kind of a application, really, is what it is here. But the idea is that Satan possesses no truth. He can only pervert God's truth. So through all of history, all of recorded history, even outside of the Bible, this is what's happened. And here's one big example of how this works. Okay, now this is a story that's been repeated through history. It's actually going on today, and it's always gone on, but here's the idea. So picture this triangle, and again, this is more of a history lesson here for just kind of a breakaway from the Bible story. But the triangle, on top would be the government and the leaders in control. And then on the bottom would be the people. And then on the bottom left is a crisis or a chaos. So in other words, all the time things would happen where some big crisis or chaos would happen. And there'd be this balance, the government, the crisis and the chaos, and the people. Now, what does this have to do with what we're looking at here today? Well, over time, what would happen is the crisis or chaos has got to be dealt with. Okay, when something happened. Now, in our spiritual application, we're looking at grabbing the hand of Jesus who controls this. But in terms of the way this has been used for the wrong reasons, really Satan's influence, is for the government to create these crises. And every time this happens, the people would have to rely on the government more. And the government would get bigger. So in other words, on this triangle right here, the government has just gone down. It's taken more of the triangle space. So that's how this happens. Crisis after crisis. Over time, then the government keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger as the people have to rely on the government to solve the crisis. And sometimes these are by design. So that eventually the whole idea is that the government can have total control. So the idea is throughout history, these types of systems, these government systems that once have full control, are going to be able to completely suppress the people. So they have no rights whatsoever. And they're evil from the standpoint of there's going to be some kind of totalitarian leadership. Today we've seen forms of government like communism, that type of thing, that are very evil to the very core. In fact, many of these leaders of some of these movements actually have been Satan worshipers to that extent even. So it's not for the betterment of people. It's definitely for the worse. And it's an evil intent, but it's this whole idea of using chaos to gain power, not to grab the hands of Jesus, but to grab the hand of eventually an evil leader. To the story. Now, the story is in Luke 8:22-25, also Mark 5. We're going to look at a couple references here. It begins like this. One day Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go to the other side of the lake." Now, sounds pretty innocent. Let's go to the other side of the lake. Yeah, we got the lake and there's a bank on the other side. Let's go over there just for maybe a ride, whatever. It's not innocent. It's shocking to their ears to hear this. Why? Why would I say that? What would be the idea? Okay, let's look at the other side of the lake. Now here it is right here. That's today we'd call this the Golan Heights. That area up there, that's of course, where I mentioned before, the cool airs come down over the warm lake and create sudden storms, real sudden. But if we go way back into the Old Testament time period, this was called the land of the seven. Where did they get that from? How did this idea of seven come from? This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. And this, of course, these are the peoples that Joshua was going to drive from the land so the Israelites could take it over. So this area, you see where it says land of the seven, kind of the center of the Sea of Galilee down all the way down and into present-day Jordan and a little bit into Israel, was called the land of the seven because these are the seven different nations were driven into this area, out of Israel for the most part over here. And where it says land of the 12, that's in the upper part of the Sea of Galilee, and that would be representative of Israel itself. And we'll talk more about that at another time here, but just to kind of mention that. So the idea is this. What happened over time? That was Old Testament reference I mentioned. Let's jump ahead in time, way up to 332 BC, Alexander the Great. He conquered all this. And his great thing was he wanted to import his idea of Hellenism, his worldview that man is supreme, that everything is about man. Everything is about living life to your pleasure, to your full enjoyment. So he took this whole area over and he tried to import these ideas. And he said they will never be able to resist all of these ideas, all of this way of life I'm going to bring in. And his plan was really pretty simple. I'm going to do it by four ways. I'm going to do it through the media, through the education, through religion, and the sports. Now, in a way, if we think back to what Solomon said, nothing new under the sun, really what we're seeing today is a lot of the same. Through a lot of these institutions, a lot of immorality is being brought into the United States and other parts of the world. But so, for example, the theater, and this was mentioned in a previous presentation, but just to kind of really quickly review here, the theater would be the media. It was also the news. That's where the news of the day was given. He says, I'm going to control that so that I can control people's minds through the media, through the theater, through the temples, of course, the religion. There's going to be another way. All the different gods are going to control people's thinking so they won't have this God of the universe. They'll have many gods that are really based on man's image is what it amounts to here. The sports, this is an amphitheater, is going to be based on pagan ideas and it's going to capture people's minds. This is an amphitheater in the town of Bet Shan in Israel. The gymnasium, which actually was a school, that is going to be taught to these ideas are going to be taught to the kids, and they're going to learn Hellenism and this pleasure-seeking society, and it's going to capture their minds. So that was his idea. We're going to capture all of these institutions, and Hellenism will spread. Okay, so Alexander the Great, he didn't live that long, only to be 33, but his ideas lived on. And the Romans loved Hellenism. So when the Romans come along, in this case 63 BC, the Romans under Pompey conquered this area and brought a Roman worldview in, which is very much embraced Hellenism. So suddenly this under Pompey, actually pronounced, is going to take over this area, and it's going to bring in this Roman world, but it's going to be based also again on Hellenism. So by the time of Jesus, this area was known as the Decapolis. Okay, so we had the land of seven. Now it's called the Decapolis because there were originally 10 cities up there under the Roman influence. Eventually it grew to 18. It might have been that many during the time of Jesus, potentially. Very pagan. Now, this would become known, the rabbis called this the other side. And that was the very words Jesus used. Now, the other side was not just a geographic area. It was an area of an incredibly different lifestyle. One that they have nothing to do with. A devout Jew was deemed ritually impure to even set foot in this type of a place. Jews were prohibited from associating with Gentiles or ever entering their lands or their homes, ever. So these 10 different nations, or 10 different cities, really, the Decapolis, look like this, with one of them, you can see to the left there, on the actual Israel side of the Jordan River. And right now we're going to look at that for just a second as our example. It's actually kind of the capital of the Decapolis. And any one of these cities, by the way, could have been the place that the younger son in the story of the prodigal son might have gone. And that's another whole story. You can look back at that presentation if you wish. But so let's look right now at this area right here called Scythopolis. That's what it was called in New Testament times. Now this is a drone footage, so I'm going to set it in motion. We're coming off this hill. This is the ancient city called Bet Shan, and the New Testament city is right beneath this. It's Roman. It's a very, very Roman city. You can see those pillars down there just to the right. That's called the Broadway, the major road, or the Cardo. And you can see the theater clearly right in front of you here. That's the modern day city of Bet Shan. Now our drone is kind of turned around a little bit, a different angle, and we can see the ancient city of Bet Shan up on that hill there. And we can see that Cardo, and the theater is just to the left. If we're looking down the valley, that's the Jezreel Valley, or the Valley of Armageddon, and way down there would be Nazareth. Right behind that hill is where Jesus would have walked many, many times, going straight down to the Jordan River and then crossing over up to go straight up to Jericho. So here's kind of an aerial view. Now we're going to look at, this is called the Cardo here. This street is like the main area. Now Cardo meaning heart, which is your main organ. It brings life. And so the idea of the Cardo was like the life of the city. Everything was on the Cardo. And sometimes it was called the Broadway. So let's do a drone footage. We're kind of like walking down the Cardo. This is pretty cool. You can see the slope of it. So when it rained, the waters would go to the side. It's really in pretty amazing condition. Many of these pillars are still standing. And there's Bet Shan, the ancient city up there. That, by the way, is where Saul and Jonathan's bodies were pinned to the walls of Bet Shan after they were killed up. It would be back behind us, Mount Gilboa. And then their bodies were actually taken off that wall by a group from a town called Jabesh Gilead, and they tried to brought him back to their town over in present-day Jordan to give them a respectful burial. Now, you can see right here, we're kind of the end of the Cardo. It kind of goes one way and the other. This is kind of the end of the street, and then the street's going to veer right and veer left. Okay, it's going to go both directions. Now, this Cardo could very well be what Jesus was talking about. In fact, I think it was when he said, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it." Okay, the Cardo is also called the broad road, and the rabbis call it the broad road that leads to destruction. So I really think he was talking about this particular type of road. Maybe this one right here in Scythopolis, the New Testament town, or maybe another, but very likely, because rabbis like to use pictures, images. They like to be kind of like on location. So let's go back to the story. A little bit of a diversion there because we had to get this idea of the other side, had to develop that. So let's go the other side of the lake, back to the original story. Jesus said this. They had to be shocked, of course. He had to be saying, "Is he serious?" But they knew the role as disciples. They had to follow the rabbi. All right, I can imagine the conversation in the boat, people them talking to each other, the disciples. Likely worried what the citizens of Capernaum would think about them, because once they saw they're headed over there, that made them unclean. They weren't supposed to do that. In spite of this, they got in the boat and they set out. They followed the rabbi. They followed the directions. Mark adds a detail. He says, "just as he was," speaking of Jesus. Now, what does that mean? What it really means is no time, not going to change clothes, not going to go back to the house. You're probably staying at Peter's house at that time. No, just as he was. In other words, now, get in the boat, guys, we're going. We're heading out. And right now, we're not talking about this. Let's go. All right, he didn't even discuss it with them. They didn't have any kind of vote on it. He just said, we're doing it. All right. He was going to do something that was pretty incredible, vastly expand this whole idea of the kingdom of God or kingdom of heaven he'd been talking about. And so let's keep going. In spite of this, so they got in the boat and they set out. They did this. Now, as they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake. Remember, this happens a lot on the Sea of Galilee. So that the boat was being swamped. And they were in great danger. All right, here were these hardy fishermen that were used to being out there, especially at night fishing. Remember, we went over that last time. This was something they were used to doing. So, and they'd been in these storms. So maybe initially they thought, okay, we've got our skills. We can do this. We can handle it. All right. Now, the very thought of this happening, they had to be thinking, okay, we're going to the other side. To have a massive storm like this would be, yeah, all right, that would make sense because we're going to a place we're not even supposed to be going. And they're thinking this is like an evil force going against us to stop us from doing this. And I put this picture in here just to kind of give a replica of what the type of boat would have been. This is large enough for all of them to be in. And of course, Jesus was sleeping, it says, and that's interesting, in the middle of a storm. It would have been right above this little, where I put the word Jesus sleeping, underneath that area, up in that particular compartment, or likely where we would have been. The storm kept getting worse. The boat was being swamped. But initially, they still didn't wake Jesus. Okay, they were relying on their own experience, likely. The disciples went finally and woke him, saying, Master, Master, we're going to drown. So obviously they got to the point where they thought, we have got to wake him up. They had to be thinking, Rabbi, do you not care that we are perishing? He got up. Jesus got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. All right. Now, what's interesting here is Jesus' response. He didn't rebuke them. He didn't yell at them or say, you guys are of little faith or whatever. He rebuked the wind. And by rebuking the wind, what he's saying is he actually created the wind. Of course, the disciples maybe didn't understand all that at this point, but we know now he did. He was there at the creation. So he created this wind. He's rebuking not something that he created, but he's rebuking Satan, who is using the wind and trying to stir up the abyss beneath to stop him from getting across the lake to the other side, to complete this mission that he's obviously setting out for, which must be really important because they're just taking off and going in spite of all the obstacles and just all the ideas that this is not something we should be doing. The disciples would have even seen the east wind coming off the Golan Heights as demonic. And as I mentioned, that they would literally think about that. We're on the abyss. And that's what's happening here. And clearly we're going to a place we're not supposed to be going. So this is demonic. An example from scripture I put right here. Ephraim feeds on the wind. He pursues the east wind all day and multiply lies and violence. There's many different verses like that, where this whole idea of this wind, this east wind, that's what it'd be, coming off the Golan Heights, was evil in this sense, this large stormy wind. The storm subsided and all was calm. Now, Luke records that the wind stopped, and the waves instantly stopped too. That's interesting. Everything just stopped, just instantly. Now, how do waves just suddenly get flat when it's been blowing like crazy? So they had to be stunned when they saw this. Luke indicated that they stayed that way. So when Jesus brought calm to the seas, it was instant calm. It was instantly flat. They were just gone. Those waves are gone. There was nothing there. All right. Then he said this, where is your faith? Jesus asked his disciples. Now, this was clearly a showdown, as mentioned, between Jesus and Satan. The question, where is your faith, really meant, do you not know that I control Satan and evil? That's really what he's saying here. That I'm the one in control of Satan and of evil, in control of the abyss and the wind, that type of thing. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, who is this? Now remember, they're gradually learning more about who Jesus is. And this, in a sense, what they're learning here, he is God. He controls the abyss. He controls Satan. He controls all of this. He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him. So they're just, what they're saying to each other, this is God. He alone stretches out the heaven and treads the ways on the sea. That's a verse from Job, and there's many in the Bible like that. I mentioned a couple previous episodes. And they're seeing this. Wow, this is what's going on. So one of the massive lessons they just learned in heading over to the other side, Decapolis, was this, which was huge. All right. Or this verse, mightier than the thunder of the great waters, mightier than the breakers of the sea, the Lord on high is mighty. All right. So they would be very knowledgeable of these scriptures. It's hard for us to understand that today, but their memorization skills were incredible, how much scripture they knew. So all of these things, many of these things probably were buzzing through their heads. All these scriptures are being, wow, right in front of us. Look at this. This is all being fulfilled. We're seeing it. We're with our rabbi. Look what he's doing. Just amazing. Now, I'm not going to go into depth here, but I just want to point this out. There are a lot of parallels with the Jonah story. And Jonah was from a little town right by Nazareth, just a little bit north of Nazareth, interesting enough. He lived, of course, many years before, a prophet. But anyway, the parallels, both Jesus and Jonah were in a boat. The destination of each was a pagan land. Jonah was going to Nineveh, Syria, which is really pagan. Both boats were overtaken by a storm. There are similar storm descriptions in the two. Jesus and Jonah were both asleep. Both groups of sailors woke their pastor with a fearful statement, "We're going to die." Both situations include divine intervention over nature as the sea was calm. But in case of Jesus, he is a divine authority. Both groups of sailors grew more terrified after the storm was calm. There's so many stories in the New Testament, so many things that Jesus did were fulfillments of what happened in what we call the Old Testament. They would call the Tanakh or the Torah. Over and over and over again, this happens. There's all these parallels, all these connections. There's someone when people think that the Old Testament's just like separated from the New. It's not, it happened a long time ago. Wow, no, it's all connected. The New is the fulfillment of all these stories, and Jesus is constantly doing this. He's always, by his actions and his words, he's fulfilling so much of the Old Testament constantly. They sailed to the regions of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. Now, this is what we're told in the account. Where's that? Well, that's over here. That's across the lake. That's this region, as we know. All right, so they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. Now, Gerasenes, what it means in Hebrew is land of the expelled ones. So that would make sense, where that name came from, why they called it that. That's where the original 7 tribes or 7 nations, not tribes, but nations went to. They were expelled by Joshua. And eventually the Decapolis and all the Hellenistic ideas, the land of the 7, the pagan Decapolis. That's it, the land of the expelled ones. Here's kind of a interesting little view here, kind of a panoramic view. I just want you to kind of see this overview. Bethsaida is way in the north end. It's by the Jordan River. And Capernaum would be just off the picture to the left of it. And then to the right are 2 of the possible cities where they could have gone to, either Cursi or Hippos, and we'll look at those. We're going to go over there. And that's the land of the 7 Decapolis we're pointing to. It's actually not at the top of the Sea of Galilee. It's almost halfway down where it starts. So they sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. 2 possibilities right here. Gergesa is, or this one right here called Hippos. Gergesa, I believe where the city of Cursi is probably exactly that location. That's one possibility. And this is called Hippos or Sosita. Okay, one of these 2 could have been the one city or the one location that they went to. All right, let's look at Cursi first. Cursi is interesting because it's a little bit closer to the North Shore, but it's still in the Decapolis. You can see the North Shore there. It has a very, very steep bank. So it makes for kind of a likelier possible location. Of course, that steep bank comes into play here in a minute. You can see it better here, how steep it is. Okay, it's a very interesting place. There are many caves up here, and that comes in the story. The legion was living in a cave. Here's some of them. Many of them throughout. Possibility, it could be here. Or another possibility is down here at Hippos, or it's also called Sosita, two different names. And there it is. It's that kind of that area right behind this little settlement here. That settlement is En-Gev. That's the kibbutz I showed you the other day where Mendel Noon lived, where that little museum was. And let's look at a short little video here, a drone footage. And we're going to move across the lake to Hippos or Sosita. And then as we do, there's En-Gev, the kibbutz. And we're moving up towards this mound, this interesting city, Hippos or Sosita. It's very, very steep. You can begin to see the road going up. It's like a switchback because it's so steep. And then on top is one of the most developed cities of the Decapolis in this area. In this particular area, it's the most developed. Not as developed as Scythopolis over beneath Bet Shan, but up in this area, it's really quite something. So this is a possible location. And it's not necessarily important to understand exactly it happened right here, right at this town or that town, but the idea is it did happen and why it's so very important. This is a very modern city, a Roman town, just developed the idea of Hellenism everywhere. It also has a steep bank, which comes into play. Here it is from a distance, way back up, further up the Golan Heights, looking back towards the Sea of Galilee. That's kind of a cool picture. Way across is Tiberias, and this area right here, it's supposedly shaped like a mare or a horse. I'm not sure I see that myself, but that's where the names come from. Hippos or Sosita. All right. Now, let's go to this part of the story, Luke 8, 26-39. It's also Mark 5. Now, here we are. We're on the shore now. All right, what's going to happen after this crazy ride over? And just amazing ride and all these lessons we've learned. So here we are. We're getting to the shore. Now, it would appear from the story that only Jesus got out of the boat. There's no indication the disciples got out. They were probably still kind of shaken up from the storm and, the evil they saw from they believing the whole idea of the abyss. And then all of a sudden they realized the rabbi just stopped it all, just had total control. And they had to be talking to each other, but they didn't get out of the boat. And there could be other reasons too, and that's because of what they're going to hear. They heard screaming sounds from the tombs up on the cliff. And they were like, okay, what else is going on here? Why can't we just go fishing? This is too rough, Rabbi. This is a tough day. So they also had to be worried about becoming unclean, because if they step foot out here, they're unclean, because that's how pagan this area was. Now, Jesus is about to meet a demon-possessed man who terrified even the pagan population. They chained him, but it didn't work. Likely they could hear his screaming day and night. Incredible and scary. So this man that Jesus is going to meet is terrifying. He's incredibly strong. He's demon-possessed. And I can imagine what the townspeople thought about him. That he broke the chains around him. He was just terrifying. And he was coming from a cave. Jesus, was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. Okay, so that's where he's coming from. And Jesus is going directly. He's walking up, and this man is coming down, and they're going to meet. Instead of running away, the man actually came towards Jesus. He must have recognized by his dress that he was not one of them. He was a Jew. And he had me wondering, what are you doing here? What in the world are you doing here? All right. Anyone out in the open who touches someone who has been killed with a sword, or someone who has died a natural death, or anyone who touches a human bone or a grave will be unclean for 7 days. So this man was incredibly unclean. There's no question about it. He's in this tomb. He's coming out of this cave, in a sense, what it really was. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." Now, it's really the demons speaking here. The demons, because they know who Jesus is, they 100% know who Jesus is. And they are terrified because they understand they have no power over Jesus whatsoever. In God's name, don't torture me. For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary place. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him. Now, legion is a Roman name referring to a Roman legion, which has 5,000 men, which is quite terrifying. What this man is saying is, by his name Legion, he's been possessed by many, many demons. A symbol of the Roman 10th Army, which was in this area. They were in control of the capitalists to try to, maintain control over the area. And many of these men lived in this area because they loved this lifestyle. The very symbol of the Roman 10th Legion was a boar, right there. Okay, so the boar was a symbol of the 10th Legion, the symbol of the whole area, and that comes into play very soon in the story now. And the pig, though it has a divided hoof, does not chew the cud, it is unclean for you. So the pig was an incredibly unclean animal. They used it as a sacrifice in the Decapolis. These pagan nations used the pig as a sacrifice. And there was one time it was used in Jerusalem by a very evil person called Antiochus Epiphanes from present-day Syria, who just went into the temple area, and he had his men sacrifice a pig on the altar in Jerusalem, which was unreal. And that triggered the events of what eventually what is to be called Hanukkah, but not going into that in detail now, but just to mention it. So this idea of the pig, very contrary to the Jews, completely contrary. The Roman soldiers spent part of their time building. That was one of their jobs. And we have found this, archaeologists have found these all over the area. They identified themselves by their building bricks. And if you look at that close, okay, we've got, what we have on there is a boar or a pig. So that was their symbol, and we could see it everywhere. Okay, so that becomes important. This unclean animal, completely contrary to the Jews. There it is closer, kind of zoomed in on it. The boar is a symbol of the 10th Roman Legion, and also, again, the sacrificial animal of these pagan people. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them into the abyss. This is a demon speaking. The place the demons came from, and they did not want to return. So they knew, they understood, these demons completely understood what may happen, and they're trying to beg, no, we don't want to do that. Now, here's where these pigs come in. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. Now, that's interesting. Why would they do that? A little sidelight. Pigs can swim really good because of their high body fat. They kind of float, and they can pedal their ways, or kind of like a dog paddle in water. Now, I don't know if this is why or not. The demons would have known this, but they begged to go into the pigs in the area. And remember, pigs are important. It's a sacrificial animal. They're also eaten in great quantity. So they're all over the place. There's herds of them all over these hills. The demons soon recognized Jesus, and they knew they had no power. All right, so that's why they were begging to go into these pigs. Now, there's an extra detail in Matthew. In Matthew, it says, "Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" What were they talking about by that? How did these demons, what were they meaning by this? What do they mean the appointed time? So they must have understood there's going to come a time when our fate is going to be determined. They somehow knew this. Are you going to send us to the abyss before the appointed time? is what they're saying. This is fascinating that they knew this. To me, this is like absolutely incredible. But they're inspired by Satan. And of course, Satan, has some understanding of what exactly is going on here. All right. And of course, this whole idea of the abyss comes into play everywhere. So when the demons came out of the man, out of Legion, they went into the pigs. All right. So Jesus allowed that to happen. And the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. Now that's interesting because, as I just mentioned, pigs are good swimmers. Okay. Because they're buoyant. They have these legs that they can paddle, that kind of thing. But they drowned. These pigs went down. They drowned. So whatever plan they had didn't work out too good. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside. You can imagine there were townspeople around watching all this, and they were like, "Wow, let's go back. Let's go back and tell the people what just happened here." And the people went out to see what had happened. Well, I can imagine they would. When they came to Jesus, the townspeople, the people of the Decapolis, if it was Sosita or Cursi, whatever town it was, they found Legion, the guy who was naked and scarred and chains and just a mess. He just screamed all the time. They found him from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. Wow, this was just crazy. This is unbelievable. They were afraid. Now, wasn't that interesting? So they're looking at this guy who had to terrify them, and now he's like totally different, and they're still afraid. Now they're afraid again. Now, why? We can kind of speculate, but they had to be thinking, who is this? What did this rabbi just do? Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. So this story is going to spread. And it's interesting, just a little speculation, where these clothes come from. Did Jesus give him his cloak? Because he would have had an inner garment too. It's not known, but somehow this man is just sitting. He's in his right mind. He's dressed. It's pretty incredible. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. Isn't that interesting? They wanted him to leave because he had just driven these demons out of this man, who in effect obviously terrified them anyway. So it's pretty incredible. So rather than being grateful that the demons are driven out, they are just worried about the loss of the pigs. This is probably what's going on. The effect on your economy. In other words, these pigs are worth a whole lot of money. And they figured, we're going to lose these pigs. He might, get rid of all the other pigs, and we're going to be in big trouble because we're going to lose our income. So they wanted them out of there. So it's pretty incredible how they're thinking about themselves and not obviously about Legion or the demons being gone. What an amazing thing that they said. And the account goes on. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him, but Jesus sent him away. Wow. At first glance, it's like, how could that possibly be? Jesus said, saying, return home and tell how much God has done for you. So the man went away, he immediately obeyed, and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. And Mark adds a detail, and everyone marveled. This was incredible, because at first it seems like, really? Jesus, how come he didn't let him in a boat? He probably wanted to be a disciple to learn all about the scriptures, all of that. And yet you told him to just go tell your story. You didn't have the training, the doctrine, none of that. Just go tell your story. And this is really something to think about. And probably the disciples in the boat were kind of looking at each other like, can you believe what's going on here? Because I'm sure they weren't scared of this guy anymore because he didn't look scary anymore. He looked totally normal. But that's what Jesus told them. And there was a reason for this. There was a massive, massive reason for this, as we'll see. Legion really wanted initially to get in a boat. Even though it seemed harsh, his mission for Legion, Jesus' mission, was really great. And it was going to happen right away because this is a prime time for it to happen. Because it's fresh on everybody's mind. They just saw what happened. Legion obeyed immediately, did exactly what Jesus told him to do. He must have told his story everywhere, not just in the town of Cursi or Hippos, whichever one he was in, but he must have told it all over the Decapolis, because what was going to follow? Eventually, Jesus is going to come back to the Decapolis at least 2 times, we know from the scriptures. Legion apparently did an incredibly great job of telling his story, and that is going to be kind of the basis of a story we're going to look at next time, which is directly connected to this, what Legion did, and the outcome was really obvious. All right, so thank you for watching today, this account of Legion. And thank you for following on Contextual Bible Study. And again, my wish for you is Shalom.